Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Way better. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome for those who's watching us through Fab TV. It's a pleasure to have all you guys here. If I'm not wrong, this is the last Sunday of the month of April, where we have been talking about the Spiritist book. Today we're gonna have Paul talking about liberation. So welcome everyone to open your minds and open your hearts for the lessons that we're gonna teach. We're gonna learn today. But before we start, as usual, I will invite Rafael to do the initial prayer and the reading. Thank you. Hello.
Get used to the truth. The habit of the white light, also called an innocent or social lie, will lead you to more serious lies and push you into the swamp of calumny and frequently cursing. I spark procedures conflagration similar to those produced by creeping flames. Great crimes originate in tiny infractions beyond the reach of justice, allowing the evil to worsen. Be morally severe with yourself. Do not embark in the canoe of convenience. Everyone is responsible for himself, and his acts are engraved on his individual conscience. Be yourself in constant moral progress. So let's close our eyes at this moment. Let's relax our bodies. And little by little, let's feel the presence of the mentors of this house around us, involving us. Let's feel the presence of all our discarnate brothers that come here today, this morning, with the same objective that we come, to learn, to find peace, be happier. Let's join our minds and our hearts and thank our Lord, our Creator, for this house, for this moment so important in our week, where we have the chance to develop ourselves intellectually, morally, spiritually. Dear Master Jesus, let your light bless us all, especially the presenter today, Paul Koegan, so that your words can be inspired in his heart and his mind. And thank you again for this blessed opportunity. So be it.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I was asked by somebody, well, my name was about the presentation this morning, and I suspect it may fall more likely into the category of a meditation, because I may be known for promoting that. But I promise you that if it gets that way, that we will promise each other to keep our eyes open. And when we look at the book we will be looking at, and the theme is, you can see, is liberation. And some of the, I was thinking of the quote of Christ when he was, I think, referring a quote from the Old Testament. He said, when you're building your house, don't build it on sand, but build it on solid ground. I have this and I can't change it, so I apologize. But so when we look at the book Liberation, and one of the thoughts that came to my mind because of that quote was, well, what are we bringing into this meeting this morning, or this hour and plus together? And we may not think offhand, well, that really doesn't matter. We'll just add another page to our already existing thinking. But we know that if we go for a job, many times they'll ask you your background. If you're in the child care business, say, they'll want to know, do you really have, are the kind of person who has empathy and can show it? Because we know in the helping professions like nursing or child, looking at maybe the severely handicapped, if you've had the opportunity to be in those places very much, you see people who really care, and they show it. And the environment where, let's say, they can't walk or they can't speak or they shout, the helping people they're so happy about helping those people, and so what they bring into the profession is very important, that they can do what they're hired to do. And you can well imagine that if somebody was going into the construction business and he didn't like heights, they would say, I think you should stay on the ground because you won't do well. So we may ask ourselves, what are we bringing into the topic of liberation this morning? Because I'm sure you came here from near and far, and it was a very safe trip. And you may read about big accidents in Nepal and Kathmandu, and you may read about boats sinking in the Mediterranean and terrible things happening in other parts of the world, but Toronto's a pretty safe place. Our kids, we have a neighborhood watch, and we have a pretty good security system, and the streets are safe. And when you walk out of here this morning, you won't have any reason to think about liberation because you'll feel so safe. And really, what Andre wants to show us and highlight to us through Chico Xavier is that there's things going on we may not always see. And to do that, we may have to let go of some of our our thoughts, constructs that have been built up since our youth. And Plato tried to do that. And he said to the people in the cave, he says, you're only seeing shadows. They're not real people on the wall. They're the shadows of the real people that are elsewhere that you should go and take a look at. And they didn't like that. And then we can go ahead a couple 2,000 years. And Louis Pasteur in England and France, Paris in the 1850s, was doing a lot of research in microbes, and they were coming up with the ability to look at tiny things, not the telescope, but with a microscope. And he said to his fellow physicians, and he said, there's things, we got to be careful when we open that body, because there's things here that can kill that person. And he was severely criticized. And here these macho men who were listening to him, they probably had to fight a duel on the way to work, thinking that something they couldn't see could kill them or be harmful. And there was the attitude, and you can see why Kardec in his books quotes very forcefully the attitude that because I don't see it, it doesn't exist. And if I don't understand it, it isn't true. And so the philosophical arguments that were given by Kardec and others were dismissed, and still are, because it's not, if I don't understand it, it doesn't exist. And so we'll look at a few reasons today that Andre Luis gives in the book as to why we perhaps need to be a lot more careful than we otherwise would be. And I apologize that I'm not as computer savvy as a lot of your young, bright, quick minds that present here, and I will mumble at times, and that's me, and it's the best I can do. But so when we look at the topic liberation, you might liberation from what? There's nobody prowling around your house when you go home. There's nobody going to bother you on the way home today. There's nobody bothered you yesterday and probably not next year. So what are we being liberated from? And, if you don't know your enemy, how do you protect yourself from it? So the thoughts are that we'll try to probe in different ways, and at least add enough new ideas that you go home and maybe make your own thinking a little more profound or whatever. You're liberated from whom? And liberated by whom? And like Pasteur in France in the 1850s, and he started to write in the 1860s, the same time as Kardec was writing his books. Interesting, eh? That if we don't see the energies around us, we don't protect ourselves, and we're more vulnerable. And so the teachings of Christ, and Christ said, I'm going to leave so I can send somebody else, the Spirit of Truth, to teach you all that I have not taught you. And that comes out over the over the millennia, and now over the centuries and over the decades, as the books, certainly by Chico, came out, about 400 of them. And Divaldo Franco, I understand, about 250, and many others. So we start to deepen our knowledge of what's around us, and we try to let go a little bit the attitude that if we don't see it, it doesn't exist. I have some notes. And on that thought, it's you know, when we're young, we're fearless, and then you have children, and you say to them, well, you know, they want to go out downtown on Saturday night or Friday night, the weekend. You say, well, you know, Queen Street West, it's a great, but it's nighttime, things change, you got to be careful. And the children, our adolescents, don't want to hear that. They say, but my friends are there, the music is so great, everybody's so happy. And they don't see what maybe we see. And the next morning you read about things that were very different than they saw the night before. But when we're young, we don't want to think that, because we want to think that Queen Street West is just one entertainment center. And or as children in the play box, if you have grandchildren or children, and you say, oh, it's time to come in, because you can see the clouds, but they don't see it. And so that's just a little bit of, we may think, well, that's got nothing to do with us, but that's what we're bringing with us. We came through those stages. And we may have a lot of baggage that you don't necessarily have to get rid of, but at least you be aware that it's there. And that will make you understand a little better. And if this quote doesn't, like the English sailor, doesn't shiver your timbers, if this quote doesn't make you think about being a little more careful what's around us, I don't know that anything will. I was supposed to have my screen going here. It doesn't seem to be going. Did I do something wrong? Oh, the arrow. Maybe you better take a look at it, because I'm supposed to be able to see it here on the screen, and I can't do it. So we will continue on just to read it and look at it, because it's not something you just want to read and go on and say, I've seen it. Thank you. Which one do I push?
No, you
Just do that.
Here do not die.
Okay, thanks. So here's what Andre says. He says, beyond the human condition, that's here. That's Parliament Street. That's Gerrard Street. That's Bloor Street, wherever you live. That's where we are. He said, a vast spiritual empire begins. Humankind's neighboring world. So that vast empire is our neighboring world to us. And he says, there millions of imperfect spirits move about, sharing with Earth's creatures the habitable conditions of the planet's surface. So if we think that liberation, well, it means something way out there that maybe the Hubble telescope or now the Kepler telescope can see, but it's far from us. Well, read the second paragraph again. It's here, sharing the habitable conditions of the planet's surface. It's not a way out there, even as far as you can see with a homemade telescope or even your own eyes. It's right here on Earth. They're sharing the Earth with us. And the third, who is it sharing? Well, the third paragraph, human beings situated on different vibrational wavelengths lean on the incarnate mind by means of countless creatures that are semi-conscious of responsibility and incomplete in virtue as themselves. So what is really being said is that those who are that close to us, that's who they are. They're not all angels with wings and a halo. Some of them are very, very evil. And if we know people, or if we led lives that at times have been evil, then we go out there, we're one of the evil. So we can't, it's so easy to study these things and always put it away out there because we don't see it here. And our books and our messages are showing us that it is right here. So they talk about the, I'm learning slowly. So they talk about these spirits that are the spirit, that's vast empire, that's not that far away. And they give me a little description of them, because we still think, I think unless we really get rid of any Christian background or any, I don't mean get rid of it, I mean develop it or explore it, or is that the heavens are a great place. And somehow hell is a way out there, and we know it's bad, but it's way out there and it's isolated. But generally the feeling of heavens, when we talk about out there, is a pretty nice place. And maybe we rely on our resident musician here, but there was a song way years ago by Cat Stevens, The Wild World, and you may remember it, and there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad, and beware. So the quote here from Andre is that human beings the human beings are incapable of going straight from the grave to heaven. Well, we could see that as being pretty ordinary. The children of despair organize themselves into vast colonies of hate and moral misery, fighting among themselves for the control of the earth. If we don't overcome maybe our mental laziness, we would say, well, what in the world are they interested in here? There's 10 million, trillion, zillion planets out there, a lot nicer places than here, and there's a lot nicer personalities than me, so why are they bothering me? What interest do they have in me? But they like misery, and misery likes company. And if they left the earth unhappy until they change their lives, they want to be where they sense and feel unhappiness. Like an alcoholic wants to be where he can taste and smell the alcohol. And the affinity is very, very strong. So it's they come close to the earth looking for the unaware. And it doesn't mean that we're always in a state of wanting to be bad, but even if our mind wanders. I remember listening to SS Baltimore, and Vanessa made the comment, which I will always remember, is when we think, we connect. And if we hear something that kind of annoys us and maybe creates a little bit of a bad feeling in us for a few moments, instantaneously we connect with the lower level spirits in this vast empire and beyond of spirits who are feeling the same way, and they enjoy that moment of negativity that you sent their way, and they come and augment it and help it to grow within you. And we'll look at later as to how they're able to do it, because you might think, well, okay, so they do, but I'm a free man. I got my own thoughts, and nobody can invade my head. But we'll see that isn't true. I'm bringing myself up to speed here. It's not moving on from me here. My technical director, I'm going to have to get upgrading course. I want to move that to the next page.
You just come here and that's fine. It's funny.
Now it's working.
You keep pushing here to avoid to go to the.
Okay, so I just push here.
Yes, but
Okay, pardon me.
Once in a while.
Meditation time.
once in a while, you just keep pushing here to avoid to go to meditation.
I see. So I told you I'm not the young, quick crowd that you usually have represented. So imperfect spirits that we still are, we follow those with whom we are attuned. And that being attuned is, we can go home and we close our door, and no matter where we live in the GTA or wherever else, and we feel completely away from everybody else. We don't realize how pervious those walls of our house are. So we are in tune with the other, and when it's good thoughts, we're in tune with the good spirits who come to support us. And when it's not so good, then they come as well, because if they're unhappy, they want to promote unhappiness and disharmony. And so controlled as we are by intelligences that are stronger than ours, and who stay at our side in the depressive, progressive, or depressive zone in which we put ourselves. So they stay. We might not give enough credit to the idea that there could be. Well, we know there's superior intelligences, but we don't know the influence so much that they can have on us. We know that Einstein could look at matter and I see things that most of us will never see, but we don't give a lot of attention to the fact that one person can influence the other. We see it, and you see kids and they tease each other, and they're very clever, and they know how to upset another person. And sometimes you'll see even in meetings how if you have any issues that come up here in the meetings, how one person can set off another. So the ability of the mind to set off another person is a lot more powerful than we give it, even among equals like us say. But among the superior intelligences, and the key superior intelligence in the book that I won't even get to because there's much to mention from this book, is old Gregorio. And he was one of very high intelligence. And you might say, well, how could he influence, or how could he send out his slaves, which they were, to come and influence us? Well, Andre Luis learned a lot about that because he thought he knew medicine, and then he started looking at the human body, and he could see the low-level spirits. I think they call them ovids or something like this. The real low-level spirits were getting in and sucking the energy out of the liver, out of the heart. The food that we were eating wasn't producing the energy. It was being sucked off by the low-level spirits to keep us in a lethargic state so that we would never use our incarnation for anything for which we committed when we came here. So when we think of superior intelligences and how they can organize, we should give it a lot of respect. We may think we're independent, but we're a lot more dependent, and there's probably very little. Socrates went around at that time and they poisoned them for asking people, what do you think? It wasn't allowed. And now we don't allow ourselves for the reverse reason that there's so much information out there that's not always true. So looking at this plane, this empire, this vast empire, this in other chapters is called the Purgatorial Colony, is a comment. For the people of the earth per se, this plane is almost like hell. Almost all the human souls in these furnaces suck the energy out of the incarnates and vampirize their lives like insatiable lampreys in the ocean of Earth's oxygen. So if you read the book and you go back and think about it, you will and see how they can actually be attached to our body. It's generally speaking, incarnate spirits are surrounded by the somber and debasing radiations from imperfect and indecisive spirits like themselves. Spirits that may be invisible to them, but who share their homes with them nonetheless. So when you go home today, your home is, remember, maybe you don't think there's anybody in there, maybe you got an alarm system. But we know that they share our homes, and they share spirit centers. And if we have a nice environment here now, it's because the spirit world is out there with a shield. And we know the good harmony we feel when we come here is because they're not allowed in. If we have the gospel at home, maybe our place is a little more protected. But the knowledge they have to share and to influence us is something that's repeated over and over again in the book, and certainly worth meditating on. Until it resolves to undertake its own ascension, it will be, well, that's us. It will be used by the universal laws. Oh no, I'm sorry. That's the low-level spirits. Until it resolves to undertake its own ascension, it will be used by the universal laws, wherever it may be useful for the divine work. And what is being seen here? Andre saw this horrible thing, and he asked the spirits who were leading him on this mission, he says, why does God allow that? And then we often hear in Spiritism the economy of God's plan. And God allows it to happen. And Kardec was shocked at looking at the millions of these people in this purgatorial colony and their influence on the human beings on earth. And what he's saying is, for these spirits, the life they live or their effect on us, but this is in case of the spirits in the colonies, they're allowed to stay there until they want to leave. They'll always get help. We'll show later that it takes only the strong and the very committed superior spirits will go into these colonies to help, because the radiations are so powerful. So, but God allows these spirits to prey on each other, so that they can make the effort and be given the opportunity to advance. It's not just to sit at a banquet table every day for the rest of our life and make useless conversation. So a description of what happens on our earth. Our earthly activities take place in a field of influences that not even we human learners in the higher realms can grasp for the time being. So Andre is saying, though, even, and the mentor who's teaching Andre, he says there's things going on the earth between the low-level spirits and the human beings that we can't even grasp. So if we have trouble grasping, imagine if Andre is saying that, and the higher-level spirits saying that even they can't understand. So certainly is a reason for us to be cautious about our life. And I think Joanna Giangelis mentions a few times about living her life carefully and cautiously. We know when we're young we race through life and we were fearless, and then we look back and we wonder how we missed so many accidents or how we survived. But so they're looking at what was going on in this colony and the liberation. Remember, the whole theme throughout everything is liberation, either out in the purgatorial colonies or our liberation here. And they make the point that there's really not a lot of, the only difference is just the physical body. So Andre asked, because the judges in this colony, and Gregorio was the judge, that when the spirits would come in, or when a human being would die who hadn't prepared himself and was vulnerable to death, he was swept away immediately to this purgatorial colony and was put into different chambers where eventually they were judged by Gregorio as to where they would spend many, many centuries. Years, decades, centuries, depends. And Andre asked, why would God confer upon these judges this power? Because these are the leaders in the purgatorial colony. And the answer came back almost like Kardec sometimes. In his book, it's almost like a stupid question. He said, who would appoint an angel of love to do that horrible work that these lower level spirits are doing? It's necessary for the others to learn, but God would never appoint a high level spirit and a spirit of love to do what they are doing. Says there are people, and this is shocking, I'm sure for you as much as it is for everybody, that first sentence. There are people who, after serving their religious ideal for 2 years, planned to lie idle for 20 centuries. Can we fathom that? Can you imagine that maybe we walked Palestine the same time, even though we didn't see Christ, let's say we walked at the same time, and never did a thing since to change our quality of life in terms of understanding the meaning of it, to go through all the many reincarnations we probably did for 20 centuries? It's there are things we can't understand, but it's certainly, even if we can't understand them, it's worth thinking about to give us a sense of urgency about, it's not guaranteed. It has to come from within. And if it doesn't come from within, we can spend our 20 centuries, like it says. It says, for the formation of such an inner mood, each believer must fight against the dispersive and perturbing influence of the discarnates who try to quench his or her fervor. And I'm sure you've read many books, but one that comes to mind, there was certain areas of town, sometimes the drug addicts would gather in a public domain, but this I think was in Switzerland, but it doesn't matter. And they were all smoking up and doing their drugs and being happy, and the authorities allowed it. But around them they were surrounded by thousands of spirits who enjoyed that environment, and when one of the human beings was almost realized he had enough, he was given the encouragement, a thought that one more would be good, one more for the road, one more would be good. And so the influence to do evil, and why do they do that? Because they are of a low level, and misery likes company. They're not willing to change, and they don't want to see other people change because that makes them feel unhappy or it makes them feel guilty. And furthermore, those who do come, many of them, under direct command of this case Gregorio, they come and they do what they're told. If they're told to obsess you and stay around you for 10 years, they do it. Or they go back to the purgatorial colony and they're punished even more severely. You might think, is that the world that we're looking at out there? Well, that's what we're sure that it is. One of the spirits who was on this mission learning was asking for guidance, and because she was planning to go back to Earth, and she was asking for guidance. She didn't want to make the same mistakes over again. She was asking some guidance on spirits who pray to return to the protective veil of the flesh in order to undo the unpleasant marks on your perispirits, so they undo the mistakes they made in the past. What would be some guidance? There's a comment. For us, one human lifetime, no matter how humble it may be, is too important an event to be neglected. However, without embracing the notion of individual responsibility, which must mark our endeavor of sanctification, any undertaking of this order is risky. And it may seem obvious, but each one of us sitting here is hearing something different from this, what's written on the board. We're hearing according to our mental constructs, our passions, our emotions, our level of evolution. And only we can respond to these teachings and make a step forward. And what your neighbor does and how they go out today and change their life doesn't mean you will. And what you do doesn't mean what they will either. And the question was why? Well, it's good to read the answer that Andre gives. Because in our intensive process of learning and recapitulation, that in recapitulation, each time we are reincarnate, we go right back very quickly and live our whole existence very quickly. What we recapitulate is to recapitulate from the moment of our original creation. Each spirit lives alone in the circle of his own thoughts. And even though you may be very close to your partner, very close to your children are not your children, but they're the product of life's forces. That's what Heals your bronze. So each person lives within the circle of his own thoughts, and we have our own individual responsibilities. So as he was asking, so liberation is not just knowing the enemy, but it's knowing the challenges, but also knowing a little bit about how to avoid it, improve it, progress. So she asked, how can I begin my restoration? And if you might ask yourself, how would you, if you wanted to change, really make a big change, what would you do? Would you go down and join the Salvation Army, maybe, and get in the food kitchen and hand out soup? That'd be good. Where would you start? You know, you can have, I'm sure we're all thinking, but I really should do more. But then every week goes by and we don't do more because we can't think about what to do. And even having the opportunity to do more is a blessing. Like having the blessing of suffering, or having suffering we can see as a negative, but maybe it's a blessing. So where would you begin? Here's some advice, and it's obviously be a general principle because you will have to apply it to your life. And the answer she first got is there are brothers and sisters nearby who are bearing the burden of the same guilt. So it's not a clear answer yet, but we'll get to it. So the answer comes better now is start by helping them, those who have in difficulty either in the spirit world or here. Start by helping them see the regenerative pathway. And how would you do that? Well, I'm just visualizing because I did have an experience that's sort of similar to this. I'll keep it vague. But maybe somebody's going through a rough time and they want revenge. They've been unfairly dealt with. And you might talk to them about what anger does. You can't always just preach maybe the high level. You have to bring it to the level perhaps of the person. So you show that when you get angry at another person, you're doing more damage to yourself. And they often say by getting angry is like at another person is like taking poison, then you wait to see the other person die. So how do we help? By looking at others who are suffering, we can maybe show them the pathway. That's only one example of the pathway. It's going to be much more than that. And maybe the books and whatever. Help them see the regenerative pathway and nourish them with hopes and new ideals. Maybe just by going to work and being optimistic about life. You might say, well, there's so much not to be optimistic about life. But to have a life is a reason to be optimistic about life. We may have waited a long time and made a lot of commitments to get here. So to be here is a reason to be optimistic. And if the challenges are many, then the growth is going to be many and great. Helping people So to fill your hours of wholesome work with all the harmony possible, the source of all beauty. That's an interesting concept that you might not even put in the top 10 of virtues. Say you think of harmony because it seems like a byproduct of virtue rather than being virtue itself. But when you think of how harmony, you get 3 or 4 people together, maybe you're going to plan a barbecue for the kids in the street, and everybody's of the same thinking, and my goodness, you become so creative, and everything seems so easy, and you get it done, and everybody's happy. But then maybe some other time you get together because somebody has done something on the street or the city hasn't fixed up the potholes. You sit and you complain, and everything gets so heavy, and the disharmony sets in. And we know when we come here and we see a project, we all get, and it seems so easy. But then maybe when you go home, you feel a little bit of the disharmony of other things in your life, and it seems heavy. So if we are the cause of disharmony, that's a very serious matter. And this is what they're pointing out here, the value of they call it the source of all beauty. So we may think, whether it's the office, whether it's people who never, for many incarnations, will ever even want to hear about Spiritism or even God, by keeping harmony in their life, they will be more able to sublimate or raise up their own level of existence. The other paragraph, failing to assist others is as detrimental as losing one's way. Failing to assist others is just as bad as not doing the right thing yourself. You might say, well, I help when I can, but I'm not despite the popular phrase, I'm not my brother's keeper. But when I do, you feel really good and your chest buttons all pop out, but you don't see it as being just as important as maybe what you do yourself, but within your own private life. But helping others is really the essence of it. Margarita, you must learn to go beyond yourself and heed the needs and pain of those around you. And in our world today, you don't listen to the news very much and you see a lot of pain. It's so enormous that it's almost, you don't want to see it. And at least we can pray for them. Again, liberation, part of it is to resolutely avoid the perilous ghosts of jealousy and discord. When we plant discord, can you just visualize earlier the thousands, and they said millions, so I'm not exaggerating or adding my enthusiasm of the moment to this. They said millions. Imagine there's discord in a meeting or here or any place we're in our lives. Don't you think there's going to be a few thousand of those spirits who enjoy discord, going to come in and be enjoying your home at that moment if there's discord? Or the opposite? And they're going to add to it. They're going to make you think that other person really could have did this deliberately when they didn't do it deliberately at all. So the jealousy and discord, they're not something that we, they don't seem to be part of the Ten Commandments, but that's the point there. Can you come up and bring this up to speed here again? This part is not helping me at all.
You just keep pushing here.
I just want to see what slide I'm on. I'll go on. You may think that, okay, we know here it's in the Spirit of Sinners, it's good. There's no question with that. And we know that even over neighborhoods, there's spirits who are in charge of it. We know over cities, there are spirits who are in charge of keeping some of the negative. So what slide am I on?
You just keep pushing.
What slide am I on now? 14? Okay, good. My technical director. I entered the final age of my working career before computers were necessary. But you might say, and this is again such a learning, learning being increasing our awareness. And this is said with all due respect to the church. We enter into an elaborate church. We know there's lots of them. But look at the next line. There were perhaps 5 times more discarnates than flesh and blood incarnates. Did you ever think of that? In the churches where you may have gone, and I certainly went for many years, that there may, in the average, let's say this is an average church, to be 5 times more spirits, discarnates, than worshippers. You might say, well, that's great, they're worshiping too. Well, maybe, but not necessarily. I soon realized that most of them were there for the deliberate purpose of troubling and deceiving incarnates. Imagine. You think when you go to church and I've sat for many years and you probably haven't seen others, and you would think they're just there, just them, and focusing on the environment, focusing on, I have water here, thanks. I know I need it. You may think that this is an easy place to pray, and there wouldn't be any obstacles to it. But meditate on that for a minute. So he said, I realized I realized that even those who wish to pray with sincerity would have to put forth an immense effort. Isn't that shocking? Don't you get shocked by that? Even when you're in a church, to pray, you'd have to put a lot of effort. Prayer helps, and it goes on about prayer, helps, soothes faith, upholds enthusiasm, reinvigorates, and the ideal illuminates. But our own effort on the road to good is a soul for our hope for accomplishment. So you may think, well, I did a half hour praying, now I can go on and relax, but it's our individual effort. Praying is it, but like the suffering spirits in that terrible purgatorial world, and Andre said, well, why are they left there and why are they allowed to be so tortured? And they haven't made the effort to free themselves. They won't do it by themselves, but they haven't made the effort to receive the help to be free. Just to look at this, because April is the month when we were going to spend a lot of time on studying the Spiritist book, and because this presentation was really geared for February the 15th, back in that ice storm, I still wanted to have a few points to show that what everything that comes in the 400 books of Chico or the 250 from Givaldo Franco or the others are very solidly based on what Kardec said back in the and wrote back in the late 1850s and the 1860s. And so when in the Spiritist book we go in, if you go in, you look at it, you'll see a lot of questions talking about the world of spirits or the world of angels and all of that. In fact, of the 1,019 questions, that's how many questions and answers there are in the Spiritist book, 102 are devoted to the spirit world and the angels and their influence on the earth. So that's 1/5 of the whole Spiritist book is devoted to some of the things we're looking at here. So when we read the book, The Liberation, we can see that this is not just something that's been added on to kind of, scare us into being good. In the olden days, that what was happened was we were scared into good, and so heaven, the hell, and Dante's Inferno. On that point, I thought it would show up, but it didn't. It was they point out that when they're talking about this terrible city of where Gregorio rules, that forget my thought. Yes, what happened, where the idea of Dante's Inferno and the terrible thought of hell came from, was the spirits during their sleep, incarnates during their sleep, were liberated from their body, as we know that happens in sleep, and were allowed to glimpse these terrible places. And they came back, went to sleep, got up in the morning, as we all did, but had a memory enough to compose and to write and describe hell. And so what the author is saying is that, yes, it is a human construction, but it came from the spirit being free during its sleep and getting a glimpse at these very terrible places. And so it's not literally just one spot. We know that the one city we're looking at in Liberation and the Purgatorial Colony is just one colony. And we know that we ever go on and look at Kepler, we know that the universe is so big, so that there's not just one Purgatorial Colony either. But we're looking at one today. So we'll look at just 2 or 3 of the questions to see how I shouldn't say even, but me and time-wise, Kardec was wanting to alert people to this. And again, the baggage, like what we're looking at the beginning, what baggage are you bringing into this hour today? That you're not influenced by spirits? Well, probably you are. Certainly if you go out in the world, talk to anybody about the spirit influence, they're not. Even Christians are going to be pretty uninterested, but if they're non-believing, they're going to be totally disinterested. And if you ever should get a chance even to start talking about it, you see their eyes glaze over very fast as they don't want to hear anymore. So Kardec, at his time, had to address that question, because at that point in history, the influence mainly, if they knew there were spirits, and obviously Moses had a lot of issues within the desert, and they called them devils then, and the influence and the people appearing to be raving mad and falling on the ground. They knew the influence of spirits, but any time the influence was noticed, it would always seem to be bad. So they never saw any good influences. So when Kardec was writing about the influence of the spirit world on the average human life, it wasn't well received. It wasn't liked. It created a whole new battlefield. It's like if we hear now that Russia has another new weapon, man, the U.S. has got to kick into gear and come up with a weapon to counteract that weapon. Well, when Kardec was presenting this, it caused the spiritual world and the believers to come up with a whole new idea of what it means to live a good life, because it's not just what happened in the Bible 2,000 years ago and maybe what happened way out in far, far away, but it's us and our thoughts. What can be more personal than our thoughts? Here's the answer. Their influence upon you in this regard is greater than you suppose, for very frequently it is they who guide you. Don't you feel a little bit insignificant when you think that even your own thoughts are not necessarily yours? Now, it happens in a wonderful way, too. We know that most of the discoveries and the great advances are coming because the good spirits are putting into the minds of those who are in that field the idea that maybe this disease could be helped this way. Maybe there's this property of matter that you should explore more, and you'll advance the level of human life. So it works in all ways, but it also works, it is working, and that's the important thing. And another question, we just selected 3 out of 102, is for what purpose do imperfect spirits induce us to evil? I know I've referred to it a few times, but think if you had to come up with an answer, somebody put a mic in your mouth, what answer would you give? And this is the value of learning from Kardec and learning the right words, because his words are so well chosen that 150 years later you cannot improve on them. It's the only language you can't do that on. Trying to get this to move. Oh, there you go. Oops, I went back too far. So why do they induce us to evil? To make you suffer as they themselves do. Not profound, misery likes company. And does it actually lessen their suffering? The question was asked, because Kardec doesn't give up easily. And the spirits answered no, but they do so anyway out of envy at seeing the happier beings. And you know how you can feel, let's put it this way, an honest envy. I don't know if you've ever been sick, I haven't. But if you have, or if you ever go by a hospital and you're able to look in the window, you see people being pushed to the window where they can enjoy the afternoon sun. They're on the bed. And you, how they must feel like wish they could be out and walking around. So you know when you're not able to enjoy life and you see other people enjoying it, it can hit you harder. And I remember the song, again, our resident musician can do this one as well. The song Anonymous Scurry is so hard to die when all the birds are singing in the sky. It goes way back. The spirit world, if they're unhappy, they're going to work hard at making us unhappy. Not only of their own, but if they're under the directions of coming, say, from the purgatorial colonies, they're doing it under order. They're doing it under fear. They'll go back to the purgatorial colony and get a tougher life there with more misery than they had before. So it's so what kind of suffering do they wish to inflict upon us? Those that belong to a lower order and being far from God. And the last part, Because to be far from God in the spirit world is to be without hope. And you, if you think of in your own life, you probably always had in your life every day some reason to think that you can go on. So you have hope. And you know, in economies of the world, when they stop growing, it's because people don't have a lot of hope in the future, so they stop investing. But you look at in your own life, you would probably every day you go out, you have a little bit of hope. You know, I'm going to meet a friend, I'm going to come back, we're going to have a nice supper. There's something to hope for. But in the spirit world, when you're far from God, there's nothing to hope for. And it's, again, it's something to, we can only grasp the meaning of as we think of it over and over again. But you may think that, well, you know, okay, but most of my life, nobody's around me. I'm on my own. So the question is, do spirits sometimes meddle in our occupations and pleasures? And it's always good to look at the well thought out answer of Kardec, the guidance that he received. Commonplace spirits, as you call them, yes, they are unceasingly around you, and at times take a very active part in all that you do, according to their nature. It is good that they do so in order to drive men and women forward in their different walks of life and exciting or moderating their passions. So if we, one of the books I was reading, the man took early retirement. I think it's in this one, as a matter of fact, Liberation. He took early retirement because he was able to manipulate the system, and he got retirement early. And the comment that was Andre channeled to Chico was that, and he spent the next 40 years of his life in useless conversation. Could you imagine going into the, how you know, pretty superior he felt that he was able to manipulate the system, get a good pension, maybe plead that he had a sore knee, and take early retirement and get somebody else pay his way, and take 40 years of living a life where you didn't have to go to work and could go to the food courts and the shopping malls and make useless conversation. And to have the one commentary of the last 40 years of your life that you spent it in useless conversation. So the purpose of the low-level spirits is to help us to avoid wasting our time. And you remember the story in the Old Testament, I think it was Job, who had the many sores on his body and was living on a dung heap, and he praised God for the opportunity they gave him to improve. Had he been living an easy life, he might have done nothing. So the liberation that we're talking about, as you leave here today, you'll go back to our homes and our streets, and they'll be quiet. And the liberation is not only out there in the spirit world that will come and join us, but the liberation also is in what we're bringing, what baggage we're bringing into today's talk. What preconceptions do we have that we're pretty well on our own, we're not being bothered too much, we don't have to be cautious, we don't have to do all these things we hear on Sunday morning or Wednesday or Thursday or whenever we have the opportunity to come? Or will we have a different, will we start to change our bag? What are we bringing into life? When you look at engineering, and they build these high buildings and they're 30 or 40 stories high or whatever, the engineers, when they build a foundation, they build it exactly to include all the weight of the building, even the air conditioning on top, even the wind that may blow. But we're building our house, like Christ said, sometimes on sand. We may, as young people, we're told, well, you got to get an education, you want to prepare your future, get a job, you want to be able to socialize with the right people so you may meet the right person, and plan. But do we plan ahead as much as we think? And or are we? See, when we planned our life, maybe we were building a bungalow. Then the way I see it is sometimes every time we read a book, we add a floor to our high rise. But have we worked on the foundation? Maybe our foundation is only for a bungalow. And yet now we're on the 30th floor and adding to it every day and learning more. But the foundation is just as weak as ever. So maybe by looking at the book and the liberation is as we add information, I think this is what is stressed a lot today is not only the intellectual development and knowing there's another world and knowing we have multiple lives and knowing that there's communication with the spirit world, but there's also the moral development. I think that could summarize the other side of what is involved in liberation. So you maybe if you're ever out in the woods and get all the trees around, you can feel very lost and very not know which is north and south. So we start at the beginning, liberation from what and liberation from whom. Hopefully it's said a bit. It is not the book, and it doesn't even qualify to be an introduction, because I didn't even talk about Gregorio. But it is, it's not new. The book was written in 1949. Thank you.
Thank you so much, but don't go away, Paul. We do have a few minutes for questions.
Okay.
So it's not a birthday today. It's not Paul's birthday today, as far as I know. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Paul. A great lecture. I would like to know in your perspective. There are two things. You started talking about liberation and also about helping others. So we need to protect ourselves from being influenced, but you also need to help. And sometimes, how do we can, in your perspective, manage the tension between helping and not being influenced and not being liberated, as opposed to stepping back to find strengthen ourselves, our foundations?
What would you answer that?
Wow, you're the lecturer.
I hate to go into the old, I say respectfully, cliche is pray, but I think it's even to be able to help others, it doesn't come easily. Not here anyhow. So to find an opportunity is a blessing to help others. Certainly in any noticeable way, it'll be more subtle. So I think praying for the opportunities, I can't answer anything better than that.
And I think it's also you give time to that person. You know, you need to understand that you can help until if the person wants to be helped, right? If the person doesn't want, if the person is not ready for the help, you know, you just give love to that person, do your best, and that's it. That's the help that they need at that time. You know, we need to be indulgent. We need to be, we need to understand that each person needs to go through things, and they have their own time to get where they need to get to. You know, so sometimes we want very hard to help that person, but that person doesn't want to help. That person is not ready for that. So sometimes it's better for us to step away from that and let the person make their decisions. In the Spirit's book, we have a questions about asking that it's the Spirit's book and maybe the Medium's book that talks about the Spirit's book how much our guardian angels is close to us, and if they would be just leave us alone at any time. And the book says, well, it's not the guardian angels that leave us alone, it's us that we don't pay attention of, they say. So they give us some space that we can go through whatever we need to go through until the moment that we ask for help again. You know, sometimes we want to help and we do our best to help that person, but the person doesn't want, so we need to feel okay with that. The person doesn't want, so we need to be free and say, you know, there's nothing else that I can do, and be okay with that. I hope it can help.
Thank you.
But you can pray for the person, right?
You can pray, yeah, exactly what Paul said.
But you still can help to pray.
Yeah,
Because like you said, people have free will, and through the free will they can either accept the help or not.
exactly, yeah,
For the praying, you can always do it.
yeah. Any other question? Any other comment? All right, so thank you very much,
Okay,
Paul.
thank you.
we get ready for the passes. We're gonna call the kids to come. And I want to thank you everyone who is watching us through the Fab TV. We will stop the transmission now as you go through the passes. Thanks so much again.